After 10 years in a relationship, my wife found out that I was following her all the time, so she decided to file for divorce and take the children away from me. For 10 years, our life followed the same rhythm, not in a boring, predictable way, but in a way that felt solid, unshakable. It was the kind of life people envied: comfortable, secure, full of small, familiar moments that made everything feel right. Mornings always started the same. I woke up first, stretched, and made my way downstairs. The house was quiet, still wrapped in the last traces of sleep. In the kitchen, I started the coffee, breathing in the rich aroma as I let my thoughts settle. This was my favorite time of day, just a few peaceful minutes before the world stirred awake. Then, like always, I heard her soft footsteps coming down the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in that old robe she refused to replace, hair tousled from sleep. She never said anything at first, just walked to the counter, grabbed her coffee, and sat across from me. It was our unspoken ritual, a sleepy smile, a quiet moment together before the day truly began. And then came the storm. The kids burst into the kitchen, half-dressed, half awake, and completely unprepared for the day ahead. One always complained about breakfast, the other about school. My wife moved between them, packing lunches, brushing hair, answering a million questions at once, while I made sure they actually ate something before running out the door. It was chaotic, but it was ours. It was home. Once the morning rush was over, we went our separate ways. Work, errands, responsibilities, it was all part of the routine. But even when we were apart, we were never truly disconnected. We texted throughout the day, small things, little jokes, reminders, thoughts, nothing dramatic, just enough to feel close. And I liked knowing where she was. I never told her, but I checked. Not because I doubted her, because I cared. Because I needed to make sure everything was as it should be. If she took a different route home, I noticed. If she stopped somewhere unexpected, I noticed. It was just part of how I loved her. Evenings were my favorite. The moment I stepped into the house, the smell of dinner wrapped around me like a warm blanket. She stood in the kitchen, moving effortlessly between the stove and the counter, humming under her breath. The kids were at the table, already bickering about something small. It was noisy. It was messy. It was perfect. We sat down to eat together, talking about our days, laughing at stories from school. Our son always had a million questions in his mind, jumping from one thing to the next without pause. Our daughter rolled her eyes, pretending to be annoyed. But I saw the way she smirked when she thought no one was looking. After dinner, the kids did their homework while I sat nearby, pretending to read while keeping an eye on them. My wife moved around the house, tidying things that didn't need tidying, making sure everything was in its place. She liked order. I did too. Maybe that's why we worked so well together. Then, finally, came the quiet. The kids went to bed, and we sank into the couch, side by side. Some nights we talked, some nights we just sat there, letting the glow of the television flicker over us. Sometimes she rested her head against my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. Those moments, the ones where words weren't needed, were the ones I held on to the most. I noticed everything about her. The way she tapped her fingers against the steering wheel in the same rhythm when she drove. The way she adjusted her pillow 3 times before lying down at night. The way she always checked the front door twice before bed, even though she knew I had already locked it. She liked to feel safe, and I liked making sure she was. Some might have called our life predictable, but I called it perfect. At first, I didn't think much of it. Life still followed the same pattern: mornings with coffee and sleepy smiles, afternoons filled with work, and evenings spent together as a family. It was the same routine we had followed for years, and that was what made me feel so secure. But something was off. Subtle things. Things most people wouldn't even notice. She was quieter, distracted. Our conversations became shorter, her laughter less frequent. When I spoke, she nodded, but I could tell her mind was somewhere else. She checked her phone more often, sometimes smiling slightly at the screen before turning it face down. She had never done that before. At dinner, she barely touched her food. When I asked if something was wrong, she just said she was tired. I let it go the first time, the second time, but the third time, I knew it wasn't just exhaustion. Then there were the changes in her routine. She started leaving the house a little earlier, running errands that took longer than usual, taking phone calls in another room with the door slightly closed, her voice just low enough that I couldn't hear the words. The first time I asked, she brushed it off. Just a friend from work. Something in her tone made my stomach twist. That night, when she fell asleep, I picked up her phone. I had done it before quickly. Carefully, never because I didn't trust her, but because I liked knowing things. I liked making sure everything was fine. This time, I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I found it anyway. A deleted messages folder. I opened it. Most of the conversations were normal. A few old messages from friends, school notifications, reminders about doctor's appointments, but one stood out. A single, short text from an unknown number. I found something. We need to talk. I read it over and over, my mind racing. Who had sent this? What had they found? And why had she deleted it? I checked her call history. A few missed calls from the same number. She hadn't answered, or maybe she had and deleted the record. I had no way of knowing. I scrolled through her emails next. Nothing unusual. Then I checked her search history. It was mostly recipes, parenting articles, a few news sites, normal things. But mixed in, I saw a few searches that made me pause. How to track phone activity. How to find deleted messages. What does it mean if your husband follows you? My chest tightened. The next morning, she was even quieter. She barely looked at me while drinking her coffee, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. She was nervous. Later that day, she left the house without saying where she was going. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then, I grabbed my keys and followed. She drove across town, stopping in front of a small cafe. From where I sat, parked a short distance away, I could see her step out of the car, glance around, and walk inside. A man was already there, waiting for her. I didn't recognize him. He was older than me, dressed casually, leaning forward as she sat down across from him. She looked tense. Then she took out her phone and showed him something. He nodded, his face serious. He said something, and she glanced toward the window, as if checking her surroundings. I gripped the steering wheel, my heartbeat steady but fast. Who was he? What was she telling him? And more importantly, what had she found? I sat in my car, watching through the cafe window, barely blinking. She leaned forward, speaking to the man in hushed tones. Her expression was serious, her fingers tightening around her phone as she showed him something on the screen. He nodded, listening intently. Whoever he wasn't just a friend from work. She glanced toward the window, her eyes scanning the street. I shifted slightly, lowering myself in my seat just enough to stay hidden. She was looking for someone. Looking for me? Number she wouldn't expect me to be here. She thought she was in control of this situation, whatever it was. But I knew now. She was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. I waited. Minutes passed. She kept talking, and the man took out a notebook, jotting something down. He wasn't laughing, wasn't acting casual. This wasn't a friendly chat. Eventually, she stood up. He reached for his wallet, but she shook her head and walked out without another glance. I gripped the steering wheel as she got into her car, my mind racing. I couldn't confront her now, not in the open. I needed to be patient. I drove home a few minutes after she did, making sure there was enough of a gap between us that she wouldn't notice. When I stepped inside, she was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. She looked up when she heard me, her expression unreadable. I forced myself to smile. Hey, you were out for a while. She nodded. Had a few errands to run. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. Anything interesting? She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Not really. Lying. I nodded, pretending not to notice, pretending everything was fine. I wanted to see how far she would go with this. You seem a little distracted lately, I said, keeping my tone light. Everything okay? Another hesitation. She was choosing her words carefully. Yeah, just a lot on my mind. Not a lie, but not the whole truth either. I let the silence stretch between us. Normally she would have filled to task me about my day, made a joke, started talking about something random just to keep the conversation going. But this time, she didn't. She just stood there, sipping her water, waiting for me to stop looking at her. I nodded slowly. Okay, let me know if you need to talk. She gave me a small, forced smile. Of course. She left the kitchen, heading upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close before I walked over to her purse. I had never gone through her things before, not like this. Checking her phone was one thing, but this was different. Still, I needed answers. I carefully unzipped the bag, my hands steady. Inside was the usual wallet, keys, a pack of gum, receipts. And then, tucked between two papers, I found a business card. I pulled it out, staring at the name printed on it. A private investigator? I exhaled slowly, gripping the card between my fingers. So, this was what she had been doing. She had hired someone. She had been looking for something. Looking for what? I placed everything back exactly as I had found it and walked upstairs. She was in bed, her phone in her hands, scrolling through something. She glanced up at me but didn't say anything. I smiled as I climbed into bed beside her. Long day? She nodded. Yeah. Another lie. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning. She was looking for something. She was digging into something. I needed to know how much she had found. Over the next few days, I watched her more closely. She was careful, more careful than before. Her phone never left her side now. She never let me see her screen. But I knew her routines, and I knew how to work around them. One night, after she had fallen asleep, I waited. I listened to her breathing slow, steady. Then, carefully, I reached over and took her phone. Locked. Of course, but I had seen her enter her passcode before. I had memorized the pattern. I unlocked the screen and quickly started looking through her messages. Nothing unusual, just friends, family, work. Then, I checked her emails. There it was, a conversation with the private investigator. I opened it, reading through the messages quickly. She had asked him to look into something. She had given him details, dates, locations. My locations. She had been tracking me. For how long? I scrolled down. The investigator had sent her a report. I opened the attachment. There were pictures of me. At the grocery store. At the gas station. Sitting in my car, watching her. My pulse pounded in my ears. She knew. I put the phone back exactly where it had been and lay back down, my heart racing. She knew I had been watching her. She had proof. And now, she was planning her next move. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing beside me. She had no idea I had seen the emails. No idea I knew what she was planning. She was ahead of me. For the first time, she was ahead. I needed to fix this. Morning came, and I forced myself to act normal. I stretched, yawned, and kissed her cheek before getting up. She flinched, just a small movement, barely noticeable. But I noticed she was expecting something, maybe a confrontation, maybe a confession. But I wasn't going to give her either. I moved through my usual routine, not rushing, not hesitating. Coffee, breakfast, small talk with the kids. She moved around the kitchen, responding to me, but I could tell she was elsewhere. Her mind was racing, just like mine. But the difference was, I knew what she was thinking. She had found out too much. She had proof. And she was planning something. I had to act first. I left the house like everything was normal. I drove around town, aimless, my mind racing through possibilities. If she knew I'd been watching her, if she had gone so far as to hire a private investigator, then she was looking for a way out. Number, not looking. Planning. She wasn't just gathering information for fun. She was building a case, a reason to leave, a reason to take the kids. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles turning white. That wasn't going to happen. I wouldn't let her take everything I had built. By the time I returned home, she was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The knife moved in precise, steady motions as she chopped vegetables. Her back was to me, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I walked up behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist like I always did. She froze. Just for a second. Then she forced a laugh. You scared me. I kissed her hair. Didn't mean to. She relaxed just a little. I could feel it. But she was guarded now. She thought she was in control of the situation. She wasn't. I leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You've been so busy lately. Maybe we should go out tonight. Just the two of us." She hesitated. "I have a lot to do." I smiled. "Then let's just stay in. Watch something. Like we used to." She took a slow breath. "That sounds nice." I nodded, pretending I didn't notice the way she wiped her hands on a towel before picking up her phone again, glancing at the screen like she was expecting something. She was nervous. I could feel it. We ate dinner with the kids, talked about school, laughed at their stories. She joined in, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. She barely touched her food. She smiled at the right moments, but never too much. She was pretending. I let her. Then, as we were getting ready for bed, she finally said it. "I think we should talk." I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "About what?" She took a breath, gripping her phone like it was an anchor. "I know." I tilted my head slightly. "Know what?" She hesitated. "That you've been following me." Silence stretched between us. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my face like I was exhausted, like I was the one carrying the burden of this. "You hired someone to spy on me?" Her eyes flickered with surprise. She hadn't expected me to turn it around so quickly. "I needed answers," she said. I nodded slowly. "And what did you find?" Her lips pressed together. "Enough." I sighed, shaking my head. "You don't trust me." She scoffed. "You've been tracking me." "I was protecting you." Her jaw tightened. "From what?" I took a step closer. She didn't back away. That was good. That meant there was still something left to salvage. "I did it because I love you," I said, my voice steady. She swallowed hard. I could see the hesitation. She wanted to believe me. "You had no right," she whispered. I took her hand gently. She didn't pull away. "I don't want to lose you." Her fingers twitched in mine. For a second, I thought I had her. Then, she let go. "I need time to think," she said. "Number." She wasn't thinking. She was deciding. I forced a nod, keeping my voice soft. "Of course." But I knew what was coming. She was going to leave. And I wasn't going to let her. She thought she had control, thought she could plan her next move without me noticing. But I was already ahead of her. I watched carefully over the next few days. She was more cautious now, kept her phone close, glanced over her shoulder more often. She thought she was being subtle, but I could see it. She was waiting for the right moment. She wasn't going to say it yet, not until she was sure. But I could feel it in the way she spoke to me, light, careful, almost rehearsed, like she was trying to keep everything normal until she could slip away without a fight. But there would be a fight. She didn't know what I was willing to do to keep this family together. She started making small changes to her routine, leaving the house earlier than usual, taking longer to come home, answering calls in another room, and lowering her voice when I was near. She wasn't just planning anymore. She was executing. One evening, as the kids were finishing their dinner, she looked up and said, "I need to go to the store. We're out of a few things." The kids barely noticed, but I did. She was lying. She had gone shopping just yesterday, and she never ran errands this late. But I nodded, acting like I believed her. "Want me to come with you?" Her hand tightened around the chair. "No, it's fine. I'll be quick." Liar. She grabbed her purse and left, and the moment the door closed behind her, I followed. I didn't bother waiting this time. No more hesitation. No more pretending. She wasn't going to a store. She was going to him. I stayed far enough behind to avoid suspicion, but I never let her out of sight. She drove across town, turning down unfamiliar roads. My hands clenched the wheel. Where was she going? Then, she parked outside a building I didn't recognize. It wasn't a store. It wasn't a friend's house. It was an office, and I knew exactly whose office it was. She had gone straight to him. She was tying up loose ends, confirming what she already knew, preparing her final move. I gritted my teeth and watched as she stepped inside, my mind racing. I had to stop this. I couldn't let her finish what she had started. I parked a few spaces away and got out of the car. I wasn't going to wait in the shadows this time. I walked across the lot, my steps calm, controlled. I had to handle this right. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The receptionist barely looked up. "Can I help you?" I'm here for my wife. The words felt strange as I said them. The woman frowned. She's in a meeting. That's fine. I'll wait. I sat down in one of the chairs near the entrance, ignoring the way she watched me warily. A few minutes passed. Then the door to the investigator's office opened, and she stepped out. Her face froze the second she saw me. Her grip tightened around the file in her hands. The file that had my name on it. I stood up slowly. Didn't expect to see you here, I said. My voice was calm. She swallowed hard. The investigator stepped beside her. A tall, graying man with sharp eyes. His expression darkened when he saw me. You shouldn't be here, he said firmly. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. That's funny. I was just thinking the same thing about you. She reached for my arm. Let's go outside. I let her lead me toward the door, my pulse steady. Outside, in the dim parking lot, she turned to face me. How did you follow you? I finished for her, the same way I always do. Her breath hitched, her fingers curling around the file she held. This isn't normal. This isn't love. I tilted my head. Then what is it? She took a shaky breath. You're scaring me. Those words cut deep, but I didn't let it show. I never wanted to scare you. I wanted to protect you. She shook her head, eyes darting toward the road, calculating, planning her escape. She still thought she could get away from me. I took a slow step forward. We can fix this. She took a step back. No, she whispered. We can't. I clenched my jaw. She was slipping further away. I had to make a choice. Let her walk away, or do whatever it took to stop her. She stood there, gripping the file in her hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her eyes darted toward the road, toward the nearest exit, toward anywhere but me. She was waiting for the right moment. The perfect second to turn and run. I couldn't let that happen. Not like this. We can fix this, I said again, my voice low, steady. Her breathing was uneven. You don't understand. It's over. I shook my head. Number, it's not. She took another step back. You don't get to decide that. The air between us felt heavier than it ever had before. There had been fights, arguments, moments of tension, but never like this. Never with her looking at me like I was something to escape from. I had built this life for us. I had given her everything, and now she wanted to throw it all away. I took a slow step forward. She didn't move, but I saw the way her grip tightened around the file. She thought it was her protection. I love you, I said. The words felt final. She blinked, and for a second, just a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Doubt? Pain? Regret? I didn't know. Then she exhaled sharply. You don't love me, she whispered. You love control. I stilled. She was wrong. I had done everything for her. For us. If she had just let me keep things the way they were, we wouldn't be here. She was the one who had ruined it, not me. She glanced toward the investigator's office, toward the door. Was she hoping he would come outside? She was trying to stall? I could feel the moment slipping. If I didn't do something now, she would leave. She would take the kids. She would erase me from their lives. I couldn't let that happen. But before I could say another word, she spoke. I filed for divorce. Everything stopped. The world, the streetlights flickering above us, the sound of cars passing in the distance, it all faded into the background. She had already done it. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She had made her move before I even had the chance to stop her. You need help, she said, and there was no anger in her voice, just exhaustion. And I can't be part of this anymore. She turned to leave, and this time, I didn't stop her. I watched as she walked to her car, the file still clutched in her hands. She hesitated just before getting in, like she was waiting for me to say something, to beg her to stay, to make some desperate last attempt to keep her here. But I didn't. She got in the car, started the engine, and pulled away. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. She was gone. For the first time in 10 years, I had no idea where she was going. And for the first time, I knew I would never follow her again.